Oh, everybody. Nice to be back. Now, yesterday, I read a bit of The Fury, which was the UK edition. And Daisy mentioned that she'd felt Jay die. And I was like, hang on a minute, I wrote that chapter. But it's not in that version. So I found it in this version. So I'm going to start there, even though we kind of know it's going to happen. So apologies for the spoiler. But I'm going to read this chapter anyway. And then there's another chapter on the International Space Station. Then that happens just before they do the jump to San Francisco. So forget that bit happened, and we'll go back in time about 5 minutes. The other, part 7. If I should die, think only this of me, that there's some corner of a foreign field that is forever England. Rupert Brooke, the soldier. Rako, Great Yarmouth, 1:20 p.m. It's clear. Rako Stone spoke the words into her collar radio, knowing they'd be fed straight to her commanding officer on the other side of the field. She ducked out from under the hedgerow, using her free hand to brush spiderwebs from her visor. In her other hand, she held her sharpshooter rifle. She had her finger on the trigger, which breached just about every safety protocol the army had ever taught her, but she wasn't ever going to let her guard down. She'd been part of the assault group at the windmill. Through the scope of her rifle, she'd seen the men and women in her squadron blown into dust and vapour by the creature in the fire. The demon. She didn't have any other word for it. It had killed them all. With a word. Roger, said the CO. She glanced across the field, seeing a row of soldiers dressed in black, just like her. They'd been searching the area since the attack, looking for the demon and the kids that had been with it, all of whom had vanished in a storm of embers. They're not kids, though, she told herself. They're monsters, all of them. The unit advanced, leaving no stone unturned. Behind them sat the ruin of a town. The whole place had been destroyed by the demon, tens of thousands murdered. There were other reports, too, of an attack in London, another beast in a storm. She was scared, yes, but she was ready. That's why she joined the army, to protect her country, her people. If she saw those kids again, she'd execute them on the spot. There was another hedge up ahead, where the field ended, and Rako squeezed through it, emerging onto a small country road. On the other side was a dense patch of woodland, so dark after the brightness of the day that she could barely see past the first line of trees. She put the stock of the gun against her shoulder, squinting down the barrel. The rest of her unit melted through the hedge beside her with barely a whisper. Proceed, came the order. Maintain a 5-metre spread. Be alert. She crossed the road, her booted feet kicking up what looked like ash from the tarmac. A few steps later and she was inside the cool gloom of the woods. Her eyes adjusted quickly, revealing the maze of trunks and branches, trickles of light seeping through. She scanned them, her whole body jumping every time she saw a leaf move or heard the soft thud of a falling acorn. Crack. Something breaking up ahead to her left. A branch beneath a foot. She dropped down onto one knee instinctively, seeing the rest of her unit do the same. She could hear a voice, too weak to make out. It was a girl, though. She was sure of it. A child. Cranston, Williams, flank left. Her commanding officer's voice was urgent. The rest of you, provide Do what? She put her hand to her ear, cupping the radio unit. He said again, his words breaking off into a wet snarl. She looked at him, ready to inform him that there was a transmission problem, and saw him suddenly get to his feet and stumble forward. He dropped his gun, thumping into a tree and spinning in a clumsy circle, almost falling. Another member of the unit, Cranston, was screaming as he charged into the forest. Rako got to her feet, chasing after them, trying to make sense of it. Then she saw her, through the trees, a skinny girl with red hair. It was one of the kids from the windmill. She stood in a small clearing, maybe 30 metres away, drenched in sunlight as thick and as orange as sap. Her eyes were too big, her mouth drooping. She didn't look real, more like a fairy, something out of a picture book. Not a fairy. A demon. Her commander was running right towards the girl, his hands bent into claws. Cranston was close behind, followed by Williams and Donahue. They were like dogs, Rako thought, closing in on a rabbit. They would tear her to ribbons. She got down on one knee again, looked through the scope of her rifle, her finger tight on the trigger. The girl was sobbing, her freckled face covered in dirt. Why didn't she turn into a monster like the boy? Why didn't she erupt into fire? All she did was look up at Rako, sunlight glinting in her eyes, and speak. Reiko couldn't hear her over the howls of her unit, but she could read her lips. Save me. She hesitated, swallowing, her throat dry. The girl vanished behind the bulk of her CO, and Reiko had to adjust the scope to see what was happening. The man was scraping his fingers over the girl's face, leaving great big ugly welts on her pale skin. She was screaming, but still she looked at Reiko, mouthing those same words, "Save me, save me." Reiko understood what she wanted. Not rescue, just peace. She lined up the crosshairs with the girl's forehead, took a deep breath, steadied herself. "Thank you," mouthed the girl. And she pulled the trigger. There was a sudden flare of light, so bright that Reiko yelped as she pulled her head away. She held up a hand, peeking through her fingers to see a shape rise through the trees, a writhing plume of fire that howled as it burned itself away. A blast ripped through the forest, knocking her backwards into the bracken, and for a moment she saw nothing but black. Reiko lifted her head, struggling to put her thoughts in order. She used a tree to pull herself to her feet, staggering towards an armoured shape half hidden in the undergrowth. Ahead, the forest was smoking. The girl, the demon, was gone, but her commanding officer was there, on his knees. "Sir!" she called out to him. He didn't respond. She crouched down beside the body. She crouched down beside the body. Donahue, shaking him until he stirred. His visor was covered in soot. "Christ," he said as she pulled him up. He coughed out coal-coloured spit. "Were we hit?" She didn't have time to explain before the forest lit up, as if the sun was rising in the middle of the afternoon. "Oh God, it's here. It's come for us," she thought, thinking of the demon. Her first instinct was to turn and run, but she'd been trained to ignore the fear. She steeled herself, moving forward in her crouch, her rifle once again braced against her shoulder. The edge of the forest was only a few seconds away, that light rising slowly into the canopy. She emerged onto the road, expecting to see it there, with its wings, its depthless eyes, nearly squeezing off a shot in anticipation. But the fire wasn't coming from the demon. It was a glowing bubble beyond the horizon, a supernova of light that darkened into a cloud as it rose. Reiko recognised it immediately, and the bolt of terror it unleashed inside her stomach was worse than the one she'd had back at the windmill. She let her rifle drop, suddenly a child again, sobbing into the summer air as the atomic blast burned its way into the atmosphere. Something was whispering to her, and she realised that her earpiece had been knocked loose in the forest. She put it back in, hearing a voice. "London has been hit. Repeat, London has been hit." Sorry, Jade. So many people die in this book. Dmitry, International Space Station, the Thermosphere, 1:24 p.m. Dmitry Ivanov had been floating in the cupola of the International Space Station when the bomb went off. He'd been there for hours, staring through the 7 windows at the planet below, marvelling, as he always did, that he was inside a hunk of metal the size of a football field, moving at 17,500 miles per hour through the thermosphere. At this speed, they orbited the planet every 92 minutes, an hour and a half for 8 billion people to pass beneath him. It made his head spin. He'd been taking photos to show his sons when he finally got home to Moscow. He'd already snapped thousands, images of the world at night lit up by the glow of countless cities, of thunderstorms raging, of the aurora borealis swimming over the world like schools of luminous fish, of the planet's ghost-like atmosphere, the bubble that kept everyone alive, of oceans and deserts and mountains, giants that he could cup in the palm of his hand, and photos in the other direction too, of space, although not so many of these because it scared him a little to look at it, at the sheer, unimaginable infinity of it. When he'd first arrived, he'd felt as if he was an insect on the edge of an endless waterfall, that one slip and he would fall into the silent depths, lost forever. He'd never really managed to shake off that gut-churning sense of vertigo. As he'd lined up his camera to capture the flawless curve of the horizon, the planet had erupted. It had been more like a volcano than an explosion, liquid fire spilling out into the atmosphere. He'd recognised the shape of the cloud, and his camera had fallen from his trembling grip, floating calmly into the wall. They were too far over Russia for him to see exactly where the bomb had gone off, but he guessed Western Europe somewhere, maybe England. When he finally found his voice, he'd radioed the other astronauts, and now all 6 of them were cramped inside the cupola, trying to work out what had happened. The explosion was nothing more than a faint halo, a sickly glow, but there was no doubt what it had been. An atomic bomb. A big one. He knew enough about physics to understand that it had been detonated above the surface. They floated there, in silence, waiting for the rocket plumes from Russia, China, America. Please, God, no, not now, not my sons, that would signal the beginning of World War III. But there had been nothing else. This, Dmitri figured, meant one of two things. Either the explosion was a terrorist attack, or a country had somehow launched a nuclear weapon against itself. They were over the Pacific now, heading towards America. The world beneath them was engulfed in night, so dark that it looked less like a globe than a bowl, scooped out and hollow. "Come on," he said, willing the station to fly faster so that they could see what had happened. It would be another hour before they were back over the UK. "Come on, come on." Hey, what the hell is that? It was Sally Phillips, the American flight engineer, and she had pressed her finger right up against the glass of the central window. Ahead, the world was emerging from night as if the shadow was a blanket, so bright and full of colour that Dmitri sputtered out a breath he didn't even notice he'd been holding. His relief didn't last, though. He followed Sally's finger, seeing the west coast of the United States. It took him a moment to get his bearings, identifying the long, thin Baja Peninsula first, then working his way up past the still shining light clusters of San Diego. LA. He stopped when he reached San Francisco. Something was happening to the ocean there, roiled into a fever. He swore in Russian, leaning in to get a closer look. It was as if the water was consuming the land, taking great big chunks out of it. He could see parts of the shore collapsing into the maelstrom, sections that had to be a mile wide. Oh, it's an earthquake, he thought. It's causing a tsunami. Only he'd never seen nature do anything like this. This was something else, something impossible. "Oh, God," said someone else. Dmitri didn't look to see who. He couldn't take his eyes off what was happening 250 miles beneath him. The ocean was parting, as if a plug had been pulled at the bottom of the Pacific. The pattern it was making was almost like the clouds of a hurricane, a spiral of raging white water. And in the eye of it, Dmitri thought he saw a storm crawling out of the earth. A writhing shape of smoke and shadow that looked larger than a city. It's swallowing the earth, he thought. It's going to eat it all. "Somebody call this in," Sally was saying. "Christ, we've got to warn them." Dmitri didn't move, just stared, wishing that he could open the hatch and let himself drift off into the endless darkness of space, forever and ever and ever. And then we go back. It was a Monday afternoon. Theirs is not to reason why. Theirs is but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. We had that, didn't we? I think I said that. Anyway, yeah. So and then it's the bit where Daisy and everyone arrive in San Francisco that I read yesterday, and Brick is now an angel. His angel has hatched. So yeah. Daisy, San Francisco, 1:38 p.m. Daisy slipped back into the real world in time to see Brick's angel hatch. Fire burned through the eggshell-thin fabric of his skin, starting in his chest and quickly spreading. He opened his mouth to scream, white light blazing up his throat, his eyes erupting into twin supernovas. His back split, his wings unfurling with enough strength to crack the trunk of the tree behind him, filling the forest with gunshots and groans as it fell. He struggled against the transformation, launching himself off the ground and into the branches overhead, his cry shooting out of his mouth, loud enough to make the ground tremble. Birds scattered from the trees, so many that they darkened the sky. "Be calm," she told him as he crashed back through the foliage, thudding into the ground. He squirmed there, as if somebody had covered him in petrol and set him on fire, those huge wings flickering until they were almost invisible, then flaring up again. No heat came off him, just a tremendous chill, one that turned the dirt to ice. Fingers of light curled up from the frost, reaching for Brick, then crumbling away into nothing. And that same mind-numbing hum shook the air, making Daisy's ears hurt. "It's okay," she said. "That noise, it's the sound your new heart makes." Brick launched himself again, this time sideways, straight through a tree, blasting the trunk to splinters. He rolled, writhing in a puddle of flame, screaming upwards with such strength that Daisy saw some of the birds up there drop out of the sky, falling back to earth like stones, dozens of them. "Brick, that's enough," she said. He must have heard her because he stopped squirming. He just lay there, hovered, really. As he was a foot or so off the ground, his wings folded beneath him like they were a flying carpet. He lifted a hand to his face, feeling it, running his fingers over his chest and his stomach. "You okay, mate?" asked Cal from Daisy's side. "Brick?" "He'll be all right," Daisy replied. "Brick," she said with her other voice, the one in her mind, "talk to me." She waited for a response, but all she could feel was something coming out of the boy, something that burned more fiercely than the fire. She couldn't make it out with her human eyes, so she let her angel take over, the world once again breaking up into clouds of dancing atoms. It was clearer now, the thing inside Brick. He was angry. "Don't be angry. That's why they numb you," she said, "because it's easier when you aren't angry or scared. Honestly, Brick, you have to believe me." Brick turned to her, the infernos of his eyes meeting hers. He was fighting it, trying to hang on to his rage. But that was a bad thing. It wasn't what the angels wanted. "It's what I want," he said. With a twitch of his wings, he stood up, hanging there, the ground beneath him like a frozen lake, those same weird tendrils of light rising from it before fading. She could almost see what was happening inside him, Brick trying to force himself to be angry, the angel resisting. He started to float through the trees, his new body sucking the heat from the air, from the branches, covering everything in a film of ice. He carried on speaking as he went, although Daisy couldn't be sure if everyone could hear him, or just her. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't have a choice. So if I'm going to do it, then this angel, whatever you want to call it, needs to do something for me too." "What?" she asked, but she had a feeling she already knew. Brick's girlfriend, Lisa, trapped in a basement at Fursville, cornered like a rat by Rilke, then shot in cold blood. Daisy turned to the others, seeing Rilke still crouched on the ground, glaring up at Brick with cold, dark, frightened eyes. "Don't," Daisy said. "Brick, please, she didn't know what she was doing." "Yes, she did," said Brick. He sailed into the clearing like a man of war, his wings full, twice as tall as he was. That sound radiated from him, from her too, churning up the ground, making pebbles dance and shaking pine cones from the trees. He stopped beside them, his eyes burning across the clearing, never leaving Rilke. She must have understood, because she scrabbled unsteadily to her feet, backing off. The girl glanced at Daisy, and there didn't have to be a telepathic bond between them for her to understand she was saying, "Help me." "What's going on?" asked Cal. The others bunched around him, as if they could sense something bad was coming. "Just keep him away from me," said Rilke, her voice lost beneath the shuddering thrum. She was hunched over, looking so weak, so human. She backed away until she hit the low branches of a conifer, almost sinking into them, as if she could hide. I swear." "Swear what?" Brick didn't speak the words aloud. He couldn't, not without tearing a hole in the world, but his voice seemed to echo through the trees, bouncing around inside Daisy's skull. The others could hear it too, this time, because they all slammed their hands to their ears. "What are you going to do to me, Rilke? Shoot me?" "That's enough," Daisy yelled, beaming the words out to him. "We can't fight each other, we can't." "Shut up, Daisy," Brick said. "This is none of your business. This has nothing to do with any of you. It's between me and her." "Brick, that's enough, mate. Just leave it, yeah?" Cal took a step towards Brick, but the bigger boy simply held up a hand and flexed his fingers. It was as if a strong wind had stopped Cal in his tracks, knocking him onto his backside and pushing him through the dirt. "No!" Daisy screamed. "Brick, don't hurt him, please!" She stretched out her own wings, feeling the power inside her, as if her body was full of a million wasps. Across the clearing, Howie transformed, bursting into flames, his eyes like molten lead, but still full of uncertainty as he looked back and forth between them. "I don't want him," Brick said as Cal got to his feet. "I just want her. I just want to show her what it's like. How'd you like that, eh? You psycho bitch." He half spoke the last word, the sound of it making the trees shake, raining down needles. Rilke uttered a noise that was somewhere between a groan and a squeak, a mouse backed against the wall. She kept thumping her fist against her chest, and it took Daisy a moment to understand she was trying to wake her angel, trying to change. "Not so much fun now, is it?" Brick went on, moving slowly towards Rilke. "Not so great when I've got the weapons and you're helpless. I told you I'd kill you for that. Remember?" He stretched out his hand again, and even though he didn't touch her, Rilke's head snapped back. She screamed, her fingers clawing at her forehead. "Please!" Daisy yelled. She looked at Cal, at the others, but nobody moved. Even Howie, bathed in flame, was rooted to the spot. Why wasn't anybody doing anything? She was one of them, Rilke said, choking on her own words. She was one of the ferals. She had to die. Brick moved closer, his fingers playing with the air. Even through the shimmering haze that covered him, it was obvious that he was grinning. He held out a finger, pointing it right at Rilke's face. She didn't have to die. She wasn't hurting anyone down there. You should have left her alone. She'd have got better. But you killed her. You shot her in the head. She would have hurt us, Rilke said. I had to. How does it feel, huh? He twitched his fingers and Rilke lurched into the air. She squirmed against his invisible grip, but there was nothing she could do. That's enough! Daisy reached out with her mind, her thoughts becoming a physical force that slammed into Brick, knocking him away. He spun 2-3 times, his wings tangling in each other, kicking up a whirlwind of dust. Only for a moment, though. Then he fired them out again, turning to face Daisy. The smile was gone, his eyes 2 blazing pits of fury. Stay out of this, Daisy, he said, the words somehow carried inside the thrum of his angel's heart, halfway between spoken and thought. I don't want to hurt you too. He wouldn't, would he? I said, how does it feel, Rilke? He jabbed his finger forward. 6 meters away, Rilke's head snapped back, her skull splitting. Oh my God, I forgot how dark this was. Her head slapped back, her skull splitting. Blood gushed out of her wounded forehead, running over her nose and into her mouth, turning her screams into wretched, awful gargles. Brick, no! Daisy shouted. Brick hung there, drenched in flame, his fingers still out. It was hard to make out the expression on his face. He dropped his hand. He turned to Daisy. I didn't mean to. Rilke was staggering away, blinded by blood. Her foot hit a tree root and she went down, her head thudding against the dirt so hard that it splashed a crimson halo in the soil. The girl groaned, trying to crawl forwards. Rilke, said Daisy, moving after her. I was just trying to scare her, said Brick, his voice a little boy's inside her head. I'm sorry. He reached out again and the world lurched, scattering Cal and the others like skittles. The air trembled, a shockwave that pushed Daisy back so hard that she had to stretch out her wings to root herself in place. Thunder ripped across the clearing, not just in the sky but from the ground too, as if an explosion had been set off down there. Even Brick was rattled by it, his flames flickering off for an instant, his eyes wide and fearful for a moment before the inferno erupted again. He stared at his hands as if he couldn't believe what he'd done. Daisy almost didn't dare look at Rilke, yet when she turned she saw that the girl was still alive, writhing on the floor, her hands over her face. Daisy looked back at Brick, asking, What did you... Another roar, everything moving, as if the forest was a vast creature that had decided to pick itself up and walk away with them on its back. The ground tilted, Cal and Adam rolling between the trees in each other's arms, Rilke sliding underneath the tail of a conifer. It wasn't me, Brick shouted, his mind voice stripped of anger, full of terror. It wasn't me, I swear. That same awful, endless groan rose up, the howling roar of 1 billion trumpets in the sky, a noise that seemed as if it could shake the universe to pieces. Daisy flexed her wings, propelling herself out of the forest, rising once again above the shuddering trees. In the distance was the same city she'd seen before, now being shaken into dust by the force of the tremors. Beyond it, the ocean was white, worked into a frenzy. It wasn't me, she heard Brick say again, fainter now. Of course it wasn't. This was something so much worse. It was the man in the storm. Brick, San Francisco, 1:51 p.m. Brick followed Daisy, using his wings to propel himself out of the forest. He studied his hands as he went, expecting to see blood there, as if he had crushed Rilke's head with his own fingers. The anger was gone, submerged inside a sea of calm, but it had left a bitter taste in his mouth, like vomit. He hadn't meant to hurt her like that. He'd almost killed her. He burst from the canopy, the sky opening up around him, vertigo gripping his stomach in an iron fist. He'd never been fond of heights, and now here he was, hovering 100 meters up with nothing to stop him falling except a pair of flaming wings. The thought was so absurd, so terrifying, that he laughed, an insane screeching giggle that lasted less than a second before he looked to the horizon and saw the city disappear. It came apart like a sandcastle, the tower blocks vanishing first, then the hills, solid mounds of rock, dissolving into puddles. The ground had become an ocean, a vast whirlpool that churned in a slow circle. The actual ocean was so white that it could have been made of snow, groaning as it was sucked into the vortex. Brick saw a bridge, a huge great red thing, snap apart as if it was made of matchsticks, pulled into the flow. The edge of the whirlpool was spreading out from the city with unbearable speed, everything crumbling into dust and smoke. The earth seemed to cry out, a scream of pure anguish that made Brick's ears hurt. "It's him," said Daisy from his side, her voice full of grief. "Oh, Brick, he's killed them all." How many people? 100,000? 1,000,000? They wouldn't have even known about it, sucked into his gullet so fast they'd have been dead before they could draw breath. It can't be real, it can't be real. And yet it was. He could smell the stench of atomised concrete and spilt blood and smoke, so much smoke. He could feel the force of the wind that rushed in towards the abyss, trying to pull him along with it. "We have to fight him," Daisy went on. Howie had risen to her side, his angel form so similar to hers that they could have been twins. "Where is he? I don't understand." It was different from London. There was no storm, for one. Back there he had hung in the air, sucking everything into that pit of a mouth, the skies full of darkness. Here there was no sign of him, just the drowning city. "He's underground," said Brick, suddenly comprehending. The epicentre of the destruction was now nothing but a gaping hole, a mile wide and growing fast. Land and sea alike poured into the pit, throwing rainbows against the cloudless sky. The effect dizzying. Something else was happening too, vast snaking cracks radiating out from the destruction, pulling the earth to pieces. One was making its way up towards the wooded hill beneath them, carving a trench through the streets, through houses. Everything was falling apart. "Wait," Brick said. "Where are we? Didn't that man say it had reappeared in San Francisco?" "I think so," Daisy replied. "Why?" "Because of the fault," Howie answered before Brick had a chance. "The San Andreas line." "The what?" Daisy asked, looking at Brick with her burning eyes. "It's—" he started, pausing as an entire hill, pockmarked with houses and tower blocks, sank into the disintegrating ground, the noise like nothing Brick had ever heard in his life. "It's a crack in the earth, a weak spot." It was as though the man in the storm was ripping out the foundations, the skeleton that held the earth together. Break enough bones and the whole continent would collapse. "So what do we do?" Daisy asked. "How do we get down there?" Brick looked at Howie, knowing the answer but refusing to say it, because saying it would make it real. Not that there was any point hiding things anymore. Daisy could see inside his head as easily as if it were her own. "We go down there," she said. Brick shook his head. The only thing he wanted to do was turn around and get the hell away from here. That's what he did best. He hid from things, pretended they weren't there. That's why he'd loved Fursville so much, because nobody could get to him there. He was safe. The thought of the place, of the times he'd gone out there alone and escaped the arguments, the stress, the endless crap that had been his life, made the same bubbling stew of anger rise up in his stomach. Screw them. Why the hell should he be the one to fight? It wasn't his battle, it wasn't his bravery either, he knew. It was the angel messing with his mind, making him think things that he had no business thinking. No, it was better to bail out now while he still could, find another Hemingway, survive. "Until the man in the storm finds you," Daisy said, "because he will. You think he's going to stop here? He's going to ruin everything, Brick, the whole world. He's going to swallow it up. Don't you get it? There'll be nothing left." He turned away from the roaring void to a horizon bathed in gold. "Just go, just go, just go. They can do this by themselves." "But we can't," said Daisy. He could fly now. He could go anywhere he wanted with just a thought. He could leave them here to sort it. It wasn't like they were his friends. He'd never see them again after this, even if they did live through it. He'd never have to look them in the eye. "Brick, don't!" So much better than being swallowed up by the man in the storm. "Please," Daisy said, reaching out to him, the flames of her hand curling around his own, interlocking like fingers, trying to root him in place. He pulled away, flapping his wings once, carving a path through the sky, flexing them again, the madness and chaos shrinking. Daisy's pleas growing fainter, the rumble of the ruined city fading behind the rush of air as he soared. So good to be moving, moving, always moving. Oh, Brick. He's flown away. We've got time for another couple. Cal. San Francisco, 1:56 p.m. The ground was shaking so much he couldn't stand up. Every time he tried, the soil beneath him would pitch like a ship in a storm, sending him sprawling. He held on to Adam with everything he had, his hand clenched around the little boy's T-shirt. It was too dark to see anything, the trees collapsing all around him, cutting out the sun. "Daisy!" he cried, the air full of the stench of pine. There was no way she could hear him over the rumble of the earth, the crack and creak of the trees, but she didn't need her ears. She would sense him. The ground lurched downwards, so fast that for a moment Cal was suspended in mid-air. He landed on his back, winded. Adam rolled next to him, the kid not making the slightest sound, his eyes liquid with panic. Cal grabbed him, hugged him hard. A shaft of light cut through the branches, revealing a cliff face that hadn't been there before. Tree roots poked from the mud like earthworms, an avalanche of soil drumming against the ground. He waited for another quake, waited for the world to open up beneath him and finish the job, but there was nothing but quiet. Relative quiet, that was. He could still hear the distant groan, the noise of some monstrous leviathan in the deep. He wasn't sure exactly what it was, but he could hazard a guess. The man in the storm, hanging over some city, swallowing it whole. He pushed himself up on his elbows, waiting for the agony of a broken bone or a sprained limb, finding nothing but bruises. "You okay?" he asked Adam. The boy nodded, putting his hand to his cheek. There were 24 pine needles lodged in his skin, making him look like a hedgehog. Cal gently plucked them free. "It'll burn for a while," he said, feeling the heat of the needles in his own body, "but they won't kill you. Come on, we need to find the others." He stood, the sloping ground making him feel drunk as he hoisted Adam to his feet. He'd lost all sense of direction other than up and down. He glanced through the branches, seeing the glare of the sun, or maybe an angel. He couldn't be sure. "Daisy!" he yelled again, his voice making Adam jump. "Where are you?" "Cal?" He recognised Marcus, the sound coming from above him. He wondered if the other boy had transformed, if he was hovering in the air. Then he spotted his skinny face peeking over the top of the cliff. He was grinning. "Ah, man, good to see you. I thought you might be, how'd you get down there?" "How'd you get up there?" Cal replied. "Earthquake," said Marcus, "but not an earthquake. This has to be him." "You see Daisy anywhere?" Cal asked. "Brick or the other guy?" Marcus glanced behind him and shrugged. "Nah, they must have gone off to fight. Nice of them to help us, though." Cal nodded absently, trying to see a way up the cliff face. The earth was still trembling, the tremors vibrating up through his shoes and making the bones in his legs ache. He'd always trusted solid ground, but now he couldn't help but think about how thin the crust of the planet was, how fragile, and the bottomless ocean of molten rock that it floated on. This would be so much easier if one of them had turned. They could just spread their wings and fly the hell out of here. But there was no sign that his angel was anywhere near to hatching. Typical. He got the lazy one. He snorted a humourless laugh. "You see a path or anything?" he asked. Marcus shook his head. "It's like this as far as I can see. On the other side, too. I can't budge. Gonna have to wait for a lift. You might be able to get out that way, though." He pointed to his right. "Could be a break in the trees there." "I'll go take a look," Cal said, setting off. Progress was slow because the ground was broken up by smaller cracks, his feet sinking into the soil. Every time he took a step, he gritted his teeth, waiting for the pothole to open, for darkness to take him. Twice Adam shook free because Cal was holding the boy's hand too hard. "Sorry, mate. Maybe you'd be better off staying here?" Adam shook his head, gripping Cal's fingers just as hard. They pressed on, pushing through clumps of broken branches, sticky with sap. There was no sign of a break in the trees, as Marcus had said, but after what had to have been 5 minutes, Cal heard something. He stopped and cocked his head, listening to what could have been the grunts of a wild animal. For the first time he wondered where exactly they were and what kinds of things might live in these woods. He squeezed between 2 trees, scanning the gloom ahead, eventually seeing a shape there. 2 huge white eyes sat bodiless in the shadows. Ghost eyes. Then the shape shuffled around and he realised it was Rilke. Her face was so drenched in blood that it was almost invisible. She was muttering something in between those guttural breaths, although Cal was too far away to make out words. He pulled Adam through the trees, dropping onto a knee by the girl's side. "Rilke," he said. He didn't ask her if she was okay. This close he could see the hole in her forehead, the one that Brick had made. It was the size of a 50-pence coin, and blood still dripped from it. Through the tattered strips of skin he could make out bone and something else, a darker shade of pink, that bulged from the hole as if trying to escape. How the hell could she still be alive? Rilke was still mumbling, occasional flashes of white teeth brilliantly bright against the red. Cal leaned in closer, his pulse drumming in his ears. My fault, wasn't my fault. He put it in the cellar, painted it gold, painted it bright, and it wasn't there. Can't help it, can I, Shill? Not if it's there, not if it's gold. Rilke, Cal said again, can you hear me? She spoke a few more words that made absolutely no sense, then frowned. Other than the wound, her forehead was almost completely free of blood, making her look as though she was wearing a veil. Shill, is that you? Her voice was an old woman's, broken into a million pieces. Little brother, I can't see you. It's Cal, he said. He waved a hand in front of her face, but she showed no sign of seeing it. What had Brick done to her? He swore under his breath, looking at Adam, then at the forest. She needed a hospital, but even if she lived long enough to get to one, the doctors would tear her to pieces as soon as she walked in the door. I broke the doll, I broke it, Shill, Rilke said, blood dripping from the corner of her lips. I broke it. The doll. I'm sorry I blamed you. Broken doll, broken. I'm broken. You broke me. Don't tell Mother. I love you. She began to shake as though she was having a fit. This is horrible. What was he supposed to do? Adam lay down beside Rilke, taking her head in his hand, smoothing clumps of matted hair away from her eyes. He held her tight, pressing his cheek against hers until her tremors stopped. Cal felt his eyes burn. Nothing to do with the pine needles now. He had to smudge an arm over his face to scrub away the tears. He reached out and took Rilke's hand, her skin so cold, interlacing his fingers with hers. It's going to be okay, he said. We'll stay with you until... He didn't finish, unsure what they were waiting for. Rilke began to shake again, her whole body spasming, almost lifting itself off the ground. In the distance, the world was ending. He could hear the terrible grinding roar of it, the sound of earth and sea and sky being swallowed whole. In contrast, the clearing was almost peaceful. There was even a bird singing somewhere, the same sound he'd listened to that very morning. How could it be the same day? It felt like 1,000,000 years ago. Defiant, right up until the end. Maybe he and Adam and Rilke and that little bird could just wait here in their nest of pine, in the dark and quiet, until it ended. They'd probably never even know it was coming. Just a sudden roar, and then game over. The clearing brightened, just for a split second, then fell dark again. Cal scrabbled back as a wave of fire washed over Rilke, gently guttering out. It happened again. The flames squeezed from her pores, trying to get hold, burning themselves out in a heartbeat. Rilke was oblivious to it, still muttering nonsense words, her eyes big and white and blind. Adam, come away, Cal said, holding out his hand to the boy. He shook his head, holding on to Rilke even more tightly. The girl erupted again, flames curling up from her torso, flickering over her neck and face and then dying away. This time Rilke seemed to feel them, her lips freezing mid-word. She placed a hand to her chest, snatching in a weak, wet breath. Tongues of fire licked between her fingers, stronger now. Broken, she said. Broken doll, Shill. Can you hear me? Can you fix me? Fix me before she finds out. She'll never know. She'll never know. I'll keep you safe, little brother. I'm here for you. The flames were holding, burning up from her chest, spreading out to her limbs, the chill coming off them unbelievable. That same thrumming purr rose up in the air, growing louder, then dimming, an engine trying to ignite. It faded, then came back with a vengeance, the flames burning up so violently that this time Adam shuffled away. It didn't look like what had happened to Brick or to Daisy. This was different, the fire more urgent, racing from head to toe as if it was attacking her. It roared like 1,000 gas hobs burning at full strength, fighting to stay alive, to catch. Cal could almost see it there, the angel, the shape of it writhing inside the flames. He understood that it didn't want to die. Or no, die was the wrong word. It didn't want to go back to wherever it had come from. It screamed, a weak noise like a baby bird, a chick that has hatched too soon. Come on, Cal said, holding out his hand to Adam. He wasn't sure what was going to happen, but whatever it was, it couldn't be good. Rilke was blasting out cold air as the angel sucked in the heat of the forest, that noise rising in pitch as though she was going to blow. Even if she didn't, even if she transformed, her mind was broken into pieces. She wouldn't be able to control her power. She'd end up being as dangerous as the man in the storm. For a fleeting second, Cal thought about grabbing a branch, staving her head in before she could turn. But her angel seemed to read his mind, thrashing harder, the noise of its heart like a physical force pushing Cal back. The inferno blazed, jetting from her eyes and from the hole in her head, as if there was a furnace inside her skull. Cal covered his eyes with his arm. When he looked again, Rilke was airborne, a single half-formed wing propelling her upwards at an angle. It vanished and she plummeted, then fired up again, both wings curling out, pulling her into the sky where she faded into the glare of the sun. Cal turned away, blinking the spots of light from his vision. He took Adam's hand, leading him through the trees, hoping that there was enough of Rilke left to remember what to do, enough of her left to know how to fight. But not so much that she remembered what Brick had done to her. Oh, my goodness. That was horrific. I'd completely forgotten about that. With Rilke as well. Poor thing. I am sorry. This is what writers do, isn't it? We're just horrible, horrible people. Let's get through one more, I think, probably. Daisy, San Francisco, 2:17 p.m. Daisy was torn. In one direction lay the city, now nothing more than a smoking void, 10, 20 miles across. It looked like pictures she'd seen of the Grand Canyon, only this one had a floor of roiling, coiling smoke. She could just about make out a shape in the darkness down there, the man in the storm, looking like a monstrous spider in its web. And the pit was still growing, the edges crumbling like sand, pulled into the spiralling tide of matter that circled his mouth. The ocean poured into it, and a waterfall that stretched as far as she could see, unleashing clouds of steam. Behind her, Brick was little more than a speck in the sky, a shooting star. She couldn't believe he'd gone. It was so selfish of him. He was such a coward. She could understand. It wasn't as if she wasn't scared too. She was terrified, even with her angel inside her. But they couldn't run away because there was nobody else. If they didn't fight him, if they didn't win, then there would be nothing left. She could hear Cal, too, from the forest, calling her name. At least they were safe down there, safer than they would be up here anyway. She'd get to them when she could, if she could. Right now, she had bigger problems. "Ready for round 2?" asked Howie from her side. The sun was behind him, the light shining through the burning, gossamer-thin fabric of his outstretched wings. They were beautiful. She could have stared at them for hours. "We hurt it once," he said. "We can do it again." Daisy wasn't sure. There had been 3 of them before, and now the man in the storm was underground. Why hadn't Brick just stayed? They could have beaten him if they'd stuck together. Something rose from the forest beneath her, searing a path through the sky. It dropped, lifted again, the light blinking on and off, struggling. "Rilke!" Daisy called, recognising her. "Over here, we need you!" There was no reply, and Daisy tried to tune into the girl's thoughts, pulling away quickly when she saw the chaos in there, the darkness. "Broken doll, broken doll, broken doll. He broke me, Shill. The boy broke me. I'll break him too. Don't tell Mother, please, I'll..." Something had happened, something terrible, something even worse than the madness she'd had before. "Please, please, Rilke, listen to me." Rilke spun in midair, focusing on the distant, fading light that was Brick. "No, please, we need you." Rilke vanished, blasting out a sonic boom that rippled through the air, knocking Daisy backwards. She used her wings to right herself, staring at the space where Rilke had been, the embers that dripped back to earth. No, it wasn't fair. Why did they have to be like this? They were going to kill each other. Daisy opened her mouth and let loose a sob that rocked through the sky. She hated them all so much. Why wouldn't they listen to her? And why couldn't Cal have turned? He'd know what to do. He'd help her. She had to focus, the way her mum had taught her to when she was really scared. A big, deep breath in through the nose, hold it, and out through the mouth, as though you were blowing away all the bad things. It was the only way she'd be able to get on stage. It was the only way she'd been able to get on stage that first time when they were rehearsing for the play. It was the only way she'd been able to speak her first line. She breathed in, not even sure if she needed air anymore, feeling the pressure on her chest loosen, holding the breath there for a moment before letting go. She could almost see the fear leaving her, the anxiety, all the horrid things inside her. "Come on," she said, before it could find a way back in. "I can do this." "We can do this," said Howie. He nodded at her, and she returned it. Then she put her head down, burning through the skin of reality. She reappeared above the heart of the canyon, buffeted by the winds which howled into the vortex beneath her. It was huge, so much bigger than it had looked from a distance, a raging sea of rock and water. Bolts of lightning, black and white, lashed upwards, clawing at the walls, sparking monstrous dark fires wherever they touched. It was him, the beast. She couldn't make him out, not with her eyes, but she used her angel's eyes to see him, suspended there in the heart of the storm, breathing in that same endless inward breath. He saw her too, because he stopped breathing in to bellow out that same earth-shattering foghorn cry, one that vomited up a ruined city, a cloud of dark matter that punched towards her. She put her head down, feeling the angel powering up inside every cell of her body. Howie flew beside her, both of them diving straight down, meeting the attack head-on. Daisy opened her mouth, a word firing out of her lips, cleaving a path through the debris. Their angel spoke a language of pure power, opening up a channel into the storm. The world darkened as she plunged, her fire revealing every chunk of rock, every glinting scrap of metal, every mangled corpse that rushed up beside her. She ignored it all, plummeting, shouting word after word after word, until finally she saw him there. He was somehow still a man, bloated and monstrous, yes, but with 2 arms and 2 legs and a head. His body was the size of a building, of a skyscraper, the skin stretched out, broken in places, held together by a net of poisoned black strands that might once have been veins. Darkness churned inside the gaps, as if he'd been emptied out and filled with smoke. Those wings, those horrible dark wings that were so similar to her own and yet so different, stretched out behind him like a spiderweb of shadow. Nothing human remained above the neck, though. There was just that mouth, that gaping hole where his face should be, looking more like a whirlpool or a tornado than ever. She couldn't see his eyes, but she could feel them. They were watching her, hooks embedded in her skin. She opened her mouth again, feeling energy blaze a path up her throat, surging from her lips. It struck the man in the bulk of his torso, pulling away strips of old dead flesh. Howie shouted too, the word carving through the air and ripping a chunk of darkness from the storm. She fired again, both of them calling out together, screaming, throwing everything they had at him. Something was happening to it. It was starting to turn like an engine, a turbine, no longer blowing out, but inhaling again like before. Daisy felt the current in the air change, sucking her down. The void of his mouth grew closer, bigger, the sound of it like thunder rocking through her mind. She screamed at him, her voice and the angels lost in the madness. Something lashed out from his throat, a blade of darkness that sliced scalpel-like through the air beside her. Another followed, this one coiling around her body, a piece of liquid night that gripped her like a fist. Daisy panicked, trying to stretch out her wings but finding them bound tight. Her angel sparked violently, fighting the darkness, and she twisted her body in an effort to get loose. She spun deeper into the pit, her mind unable to make sense of the thing that held her. There was nothing there, just a strand of complete and utter absence that seemed to eat into her, as though it was trying to swallow her up, out of existence. "No!" she yelled, screaming at it again and again until the piece of night began to unravel, dissolving in the cold fire of her angel. But it was too late. The current had her, reeling her into the clouds of smoke and dust that circled the beast's throat. The roar of the vortex grew even louder, and there was a sudden rush of movement, like being sucked down a drain. She closed her eyes, then realised that not seeing was infinitely worse than seeing. When she opened them again, she saw it up ahead. The end, a point of utter blackness into which everything was being pulled. It was the tiniest of holes, surely too small to hold all of this stuff. But it breathed in every last scrap of matter, bolts of not quite lightning cracking up from it, dozens every second. There was no sound coming from it, and she wondered if maybe she'd gone deaf. Another flutter of liquid night, but she twisted out of the way, feeling the unbearable nothing of it brush past her. She opened her mouth, fighting back. Something odd was happening as she closed in on the flickering hole. Things were slowing down, Or maybe not slowing down, but breaking apart, as if even time couldn't hold itself here. Time, sound, matter, life. The man in the storm hated it all. He hated everything. She could almost see its story in the immense quiet that surrounded its throat. This thing, whatever it was, it came from a place where there was nothing. This thing was what had existed before life, before the first stars, before the Big Bang. It was the emptiness before the universe, and the emptiness that would follow it. The awful sense of loneliness that washed over her was too much. She couldn't bear it. This thing was a black hole. It would devour everything, just feed and feed and feed until there was nothing left. No warmth, no laughter, no love, just silence. Forever and ever. There was nothing they could do against this. It was hopeless. She heard Howie calling to her, but she ignored him. She took one last look at the beast, then flexed her wings and burned herself out of its reach. How long's this next chapter? We'll do one more. I better go and get me girls. Rilke, San Francisco, 2:32 p.m. There was something wrong with her head, but she couldn't work out what. It hurt, for one. A throbbing needle of agony right in the centre of her brain. Noise seemed to radiate out from it, the sound of cathedral bells ringing, and there was a whistling, maddening itch in her ears. She couldn't think straight, couldn't seem to hold a thought up there. All she knew was that he had done it, the tall boy. Brick? Was that his name? Rilke tried to remember, but the images and memories in her brain were like jigsaw pieces in a box. They didn't make any sense. She couldn't see too well either. In fact, she couldn't really see at all, but something was seeing for her, the world a web of golden strands that made up trees and fields and hills and sky. There was something inside her, something made of fire, or had she always been like this? She wasn't sure. She didn't know which thoughts were real and which were imagined. Was she a doll? A broken one? What had brought her to life? Revenge. Someone had died. Schiller. Had he been a doll too? Yes, a beautiful doll, her beautiful doll. Someone had broken him. The tall boy with wings. The engine of her brain stalled, the whistle rising in pitch like people were screaming right into her ears. She felt her body shake, a fit that made every muscle spasm. It was like she had strings, not a doll, but a puppet. She looked around with her new eyes, seeing the world laid out before her, bare and vulnerable. Were they atoms she could see, the building blocks that made up every stone, every cloud, every chirruping bird, every mouthful of air she took in? There were so many of them, galaxies of them, but they seemed to make sense to her. She could see a glowing trail in the sky where someone like her had been, like a ship's wake. The tall boy, he had come this way. She beat her wings. Had she always had them? She couldn't be sure. The noise was too much. She couldn't see anything past it. Every time she tried it was like she was pushing herself too hard. Something up there in the clockwork toy of her brain might just snap or ping out if she wasn't careful. Maybe there was no before, only now. She might have just woken up for the first time. That made sense, she thought. If she was a doll, then maybe she'd been asleep. Maybe being broken is what woke her. No. Maybe Schiller being broken is what woke her. She thought she saw him. His skin sparkling as if he was carved from glass or ice, his eyes dark beads. The tall boy had broken him. Yes, that was it. Why else was she so angry with him, the one called Brick? It's okay, Schiller, she said, or tried to say, but she couldn't remember how to work her lips. That was okay, though. Dolls didn't need to speak. She just thought it, worried that if she didn't, then it might just slip right out of the mess of her head. I know what I have to do. I have to find him, the tall boy. I have to break him too. It's the only way we'll be back together, right? Shill? Tell me that's right. Mother won't be angry if I break him. Her brain screamed like a jet engine. She ignored it as best she could, following the trail, the world passing by beneath her, as if she was being carried, like something had her under its arm. But of course she was a doll, so something had to be carrying her, something old and terrible and full of fire. She could almost hear it behind the chaos, howling at her with words she could never hope to understand, trying to tell her something. It's okay, she said. I know what you want me to do. She thought of the doll called Schiller, and she thought of the tall boy. I'll break him. I'll break him. I'll break him. And we'll leave it there. Cal is next. And yeah, it's all going a bit wrong. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that a bit run, because I've got to get me my Kitty Winks from school. Hello, Kitty Winks, if you ever watch this. Although, a bit worried about you listening to this, because it's really grim. I hope you enjoyed that. It's been lovely being here. Lovely reading you another few chapters. We've got a little bit left to go. About 30%. My Kindle is telling me 30% of the book left to go. So we are nearly at the end. It's a long one. It's a beast. Anyway, I hope you're having a brilliant day, and I hope you have a brilliant time, whatever you're doing. And I hope life is brilliant, and I hope you're brilliant. I know you're brilliant, because, well, you wouldn't be here if you weren't brilliant. Anyway, catch you soon. Bye.